The sound of labored breathing in his barn made Zachary Xavier freeze with his hand on the stall door, the hair on the back of his neck standing up as he slowly reached for the rifle he kept mounted near the entrance. It was late September in 1878, and Bandera, Texas had been plagued by cattle rustlers for the better part of 2 months, men who would not hesitate to put a bullet in a rancher who caught them red-handed. The moon hung full and bright outside, casting silver light through the cracks in the barn walls, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Zachary had lived alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since his father passed from fever, and he knew every sound this property made, every creak of wood and shuffle of hooves. This breathing, ragged and desperate, came from above. He climbed the ladder to the hayloft with careful movements, each rung groaning slightly under his weight. His heart hammered against his ribs, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. When his head cleared the loft floor, he raised the rifle and scanned the darkness, his eyes adjusting slowly to the deeper shadows up here where the moonlight barely reached. "I know you are up here," he said quietly, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "Show yourself." A rustling came from the far corner, and then a shape emerged from behind a stack of hay bales. In the dim light, he could make out a woman, young and thin, her dress torn and dirty, her dark hair hanging in tangled waves around her pale face. Her eyes, wide and terrified, reflected what little light reached them. She held her hands up, palms out, and he could see them trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please do not send me back." Zachary lowered the rifle slightly, studying her. She could not have been more than 20 years old, and she looked like she had been through hell itself. Her dress had once been blue, he thought, but now it was stained with dirt and what might have been blood. One sleeve was torn nearly off, and he could see bruises on her exposed shoulder. Her feet were bare and filthy, and she swayed slightly where she stood, as if standing took more energy than she had to spare. "Send you back where?" he asked, climbing the rest of the way up and setting the rifle aside, though he kept it within reach. He held his hands out, showing he meant no immediate harm. "To him," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "To Clayton. My husband." She said the word husband like it tasted of poison, and Zachary felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard stories, of course, of men who treated their wives worse than they treated their animals, but he had never seen the evidence of it so starkly displayed. The woman before him looked like a wounded creature, ready to bolt at any moment. "You are safe here," he found himself saying, though he did not know why he said it, why he made such a promise to a stranger who had broken into his barn in the dead of night. "Nobody is going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for deception, for cruelty, for whatever she had learned to expect from men. She must have found something that satisfied her, because her shoulders sagged and she sank down to the hay-covered floor, her head dropping into her hands. He could see her back shaking with silent sobs. Zachary moved slowly, the way he would approach a spooked horse, and knelt a few feet away from her. "My name is Zachary," he said. "This is my ranch. You are in Bandera, Texas, about 15 miles outside of town. Can you tell me your name?" She raised her head, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dirt on her face. "Laura," she said quietly. "Laura Northwood." "Laura," he repeated, and the name felt right in his mouth somehow. "When did you last eat?" She looked at him blankly for a moment, as if the question confused her, as if eating was so far removed from her immediate concerns that she could not quite process it. "I do not remember," she said finally. "Yesterday morning, maybe, before I ran." Zachary stood, slowly so as not to startle her. "Wait here," he said. I am going to bring you some food and water. I will be right back." He saw panic flash across her face. "You will not tell anyone. You will not send word to town." "I will not tell anyone," he promised, and he meant it, though he could not have explained why. Something about this woman, about the desperation in her eyes and the way she held herself like she expected the next blow to fall at any moment, called to something deep in his chest. "I will be 10 minutes. There is more hay in those bales if you want to make yourself more comfortable." He climbed down the ladder and walked quickly to his house, a small but sturdy cabin his father had built when he first claimed this land. Inside, he lit a lantern and pulled out what food he had readily available, slicing thick pieces of bread from the loaf his neighbor Mrs. Henderson had brought by 2 days ago, adding cheese and some dried beef. He filled a canteen with fresh water from the pump and grabbed a clean blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed. When he returned to the barn, he found Laura had not moved from where she sat, as if she had been afraid that making herself comfortable would somehow be presumptuous, would remind him that she was trespassing and give him cause to change his mind about helping her. He set the food down beside her and handed her the canteen. "Drink slowly," he advised. "If you have not had water in a while, drinking too fast will make you sick." She took the canteen with shaking hands and sipped at it, and he saw her eyes close in relief. After a moment, she lowered it and reached for the food, and he had to look away from the desperate hunger in her face as she ate. It made him angry, a slow burning anger at whoever had driven this woman to such a state, had made her so hungry that she ate like she might never eat again. "The blanket is clean," he said, nodding toward where he had set it. "You can sleep up here tonight. In the morning we will figure out what to do." Laura swallowed the bite she had been chewing and looked at him with those wide, uncertain eyes. "Why are you helping me? You do not even know me." It was a fair question, and Zachary considered it for a moment before answering. "My mother," he said slowly, "before she died, she used to say that the measure of a man is in how he treats those who have no power to help him in return. You came here needing help, and I have the power to give it." That seems reason enough. Something shifted in Laura's expression, a softening around her eyes, a lessening of the terrible tension that had held her rigid. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and moved toward the ladder. "I will be in the house if you need anything, just call out." I am a light sleeper. That night, lying in his bed with the window open so he could hear if she cried out, Zachary stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had gotten himself into. If this Clayton came looking for his wife, there would be trouble. In 1878 Texas, a man's wife was considered his property in the eyes of many, and interfering in a marriage could bring down all manner of consequences. But he had given his word, and his father had raised him to value his word above almost everything else. More than that, though, something about Laura had struck him deep. He could not stop seeing her face, the way fear and hope had warred in her expression when he promised not to send her back. He was 26 years old and had never been married, had never even come close. The ranch took all his time and energy, and the few women in Bandera had never caught his interest. But Laura, even filthy and desperate and frightened, had caught it in a way he did not fully understand. When dawn broke pink and gold across the Texas sky, Zachary rose and dressed, pulling on his work clothes and his worn boots. He had cattle to check on and fences to mend, the never-ending work of a ranch. But first, he went to the barn. Laura was awake, sitting with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring out through a gap in the boards at the rising sun. She turned when she heard him climb the ladder, and he saw that her face, while still marked with fading bruises, looked less haunted in the morning light. "Good morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted. "It is strange to sleep without fear." The simple statement broke something in his chest. "Come down to the house," he said. "I will make breakfast and you can wash up if you like. I have a tub and can heat water." She hesitated, and he understood. Going into his house was different from hiding in his barn. It was more intimate, more trusting. But after a moment, she nodded and stood, wrapping the blanket more tightly around herself. In the house, Zachary set about making breakfast, frying eggs and bacon while Laura stood uncertainly near the door. "The washroom is through there," he said, nodding to the side door. "I will heat water for a bath after we eat." They sat at his small table, and the silence felt heavy with unasked questions. Finally, Laura spoke. "You are wondering about him," she said quietly. "About why I ran." "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to," Zachary said, though he found he desperately wanted to know, wanted to understand what had driven her to his barn in the middle of the night. Laura looked down at her plate, pushing eggs around with her fork. "I met Clayton 2 years ago," she began, her voice so soft he had to lean forward to hear her. "He was charming at first, said all the right things. My father had died the year before, and my mother was struggling. Clayton had money, had a ranch of his own up near Careville. When he asked me to marry him, my mother encouraged it. She thought he would take care of me." She paused, and Zachary waited, giving her time. "For the first few months it was tolerable," Laura continued. "He was not warm, but he was not cruel either. But then things started to change. He would get angry over small things, things I did not even realize I had done wrong. The first time he hit me, he apologized after, said he did not know what had come over him, promised it would never happen again." Zachary's hands clenched into fists under the table, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to scare her into silence. "But it did happen again," Laura said, and now tears were sliding down her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. "And again, and it kept getting worse. He would lock me in our bedroom for days sometimes, would not let me eat unless I begged properly. Last week, he told me he was going to kill me. He was drunk, and he had his hands around my throat, and I believed him. So when he finally passed out, I ran. I have been hiding in the countryside for 3 days, moving at night, trying to get as far from Careville as I could." "Where is your mother now?" Zachary asked gently. "She died last winter," Laura said. "Pneumonia. After that, there was no one left who cared if I lived or died. Clayton told me that, told me I was alone in the world and I should be grateful he kept me." Zachary stood and moved to kneel beside her chair, looking up at her tear-stained face. "You are not alone," he said firmly, "and you are not going back to him. I do not care what the law says. I do not care if he comes here with the sheriff himself. You are staying here where you are safe for as long as you need." Laura stared at him, fresh tears spilling over. "Why would you do this for me? You could get in so much trouble. He could hurt you." "Let him try," Zachary said, and he meant it. The anger that had been simmering in him since she first told him her story was now a hot coal in his chest. "I have dealt with worse than one drunk bully." After breakfast, Zachary heated water for a bath and then excused himself to do the morning chores, giving Laura privacy. As he worked, checking on his small herd of cattle and repairing a section of fence that had come loose, his mind churned. He needed a plan, needed to figure out how to keep Laura safe without bringing the law down on both of them. Texas law in 1878 was not kind to runaway wives, and if Clayton reported her missing, there could be real trouble. When he returned to the house, Laura was sitting in the main room, wearing what he realized must be one of his old shirts over her ruined dress. Her hair was wet and combed back from her face, and he could see more clearly now the extent of her bruises. Her right eye was still slightly swollen, and there were marks on her throat that looked like fingerprints. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the shirt. My dress is barely holding together. I do not mind, he said. Tomorrow I will ride into town and get you some proper clothes. We can say you are my cousin come to stay for a while. Laura bit her lip. He might come looking. He might ask around. Then we will deal with that when it happens, Zachary said. But I am not going to keep you hidden like some secret. If you are staying here, you are staying as a guest, as family, with your head held high. Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Laura insisted on helping around the house, cooking and cleaning despite Zachary's protests that she was still recovering. He found himself looking forward to coming in from the fields and finding her there, finding the house warm and full of good smells and life. She smiled more as the days passed, and the haunted look began to fade from her eyes, though he sometimes caught her staring out the window with an expression of fear, as if expecting to see Clayton riding up the path at any moment. Zachary made the trip into Bandera and bought fabric and supplies, which Mrs. Henderson kindly made into 2 simple dresses for Laura. He told the story they had agreed on, that Laura was his cousin from back east, come to stay after a family tragedy. Mrs. Henderson, a kind widow who had known Zachary's parents, accepted the story without question and promised to call on Laura soon. You are building me a whole life here, Laura said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. A story clothes friends. Why? Zachary looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her dark hair and softened her features. Because you deserve a life, he said simply. You deserve more than fear and pain. You deserve to be happy. Laura turned to him, her eyes searching his face. I have not known many good men in my life, she said softly. My father was good, but he died when I was 17. Since then, there has only been Clayton and the men like him, men who see women as things to own. You are different. I am just doing what is right, Zachary said, though his heart was beating faster at her nearness, at the warmth in her voice when she spoke to him. No, Laura said. It is more than that. Most men would have sent me away, would have wanted nothing to do with another man's wife. But you took me in, no questions asked, and you have treated me with more kindness in these few days than I have known in 2 years. They sat in silence for a while, and Zachary felt the weight of unspoken things between them. He was falling for her, he realized. Somewhere between finding her in his barn and watching her laugh at one of his stories over dinner, he had started to fall in love with Laura. But she was married and damaged, and probably not ready for any kind of romantic attention from him or anyone else. 3 weeks after Laura arrived, the trouble Zachary had been expecting finally came. He was in the barn mending a saddle when he heard horses approaching. Through the open door, he saw 3 men ride up, and his stomach sank when he recognized the one in front. Clayton Marsh was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a hard face and cold eyes. He had a sheriff's deputy with him and another man Zachary did not recognize. Zachary walked out to meet them, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "I am looking for my wife," Clayton said, his voice a low growl. "Laura Northwood. I have reason to believe she might have passed through this area." "A lot of people pass through," Zachary said mildly. "What makes you think she came this way?" "Someone saw a woman matching her description near the Johnson Ranch about 3 weeks ago," the deputy said. "He was young, maybe 22, and looked uncomfortable. We are just asking around, making sure she is safe." "I am sure you understand my concern," Clayton said, though his tone suggested he was not used to explaining himself. "My wife is not well. She gets confused sometimes, wanders off. I am worried about her." Zachary felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "I have not seen any confused women wandering around," he said. But if I do, I will be sure to let the proper authorities know. Clayton's eyes narrowed. You mind if we look around, just to ease my mind? I do mind, actually, Zachary said pleasantly. This is private property and you do not have a warrant. So unless the deputy here has some legal reason to search my land, I am going to have to ask you to leave. The deputy shifted in his saddle. He is right, Mr. Marsh. We cannot search without cause or permission. Clayton stared at Zachary for a long moment, and Zachary stared back, not flinching, not backing down. Finally, Clayton smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I will find her, he said quietly. And when I do, I will remember who helped her and who did not. You have yourself a good day now, Zachary said, his tone still friendly despite the threat that hung in the air. After they left, Zachary hurried to the house. Laura was standing away from the window, pressed against the wall, her face white as snow. She was shaking violently. He was here, she whispered. He was right here. Zachary crossed to her and after a moment's hesitation pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, her whole body trembling, and he held her close, one hand stroking her hair. He did not see you, he said firmly. He has no proof you are here. You are safe. He will come back, Laura said against his chest. He will not stop looking. Then we will deal with it, Zachary said, but I am not letting him take you, I promise you that. That night, neither of them could sleep. Zachary sat in his chair with his rifle across his lap, and Laura sat curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket. They talked through the night, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. As dawn approached, Zachary realized he had never felt closer to another person in his life. I am falling in love with you, he said suddenly, the words coming out before he could stop them. I know that is probably the last thing you want to hear, and I know the timing is terrible, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. These past weeks, having you here, getting to know you, I have been happier than I have been in years. You make me want to be better, to do better. Laura stared at him, her eyes wide. Zachary, I am married. Even if I hate him, even if I ran from him in the eyes of the law and the church, I am still his wife. I know, Zachary said, and I am not asking you to do anything about it. I just needed you to know how I feel. Whatever happens, whatever you decide to do, I will support you. But I cannot pretend anymore that this is just about giving shelter to someone in need. It is more than that for me. Laura stood and crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair. She took his hand in both of hers. It is more than that for me too, she said quietly. I have been trying not to admit it to myself because it feels wrong somehow, like I am betraying something, even though I owe Clayton nothing. But you are right. I am falling in love with you too. You have shown me what it means to be treated with respect, with kindness. You have made me remember who I was before Clayton, the girl who laughed and dreamed and believed in good things. Zachary reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Then we will figure this out together, he said. Somehow. The solution came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, Mrs. Henderson came calling, bringing a pie and curiosity about Zachary's cousin. Laura greeted her nervously, but the older woman's warm manner soon put her at ease. They sat on the porch drinking tea while Zachary worked within earshot, and he heard them talking and laughing like old friends. After Mrs. Henderson left, Laura came to find him in the barn, her eyes bright with an emotion he could not quite read. She knew, Laura said without preamble. Mrs. Henderson, she knew I was not your cousin. Zachary's heart sank. She said something. She said she recognized fear when she saw it, Laura continued. She told me that 40 years ago she ran from a man who hurt her, ran all the way from Missouri to Texas. She said she understood and she wanted to help. Help how? Zachary asked carefully. She said there is a lawyer in San Antonio, a man who has helped women in situations like mine before. He knows ways to get marriages dissolved, especially in cases of cruelty. It is not easy and it takes time, but it is possible. She said she would write to him on my behalf if I wanted. Hope, bright and sharp, flared in Zachary's chest. Is that what you want? Yes, Laura said firmly. I want to be free of Clayton, truly free. Not just hiding, not just running, but legally free. I want to be able to build a real life without looking over my shoulder, and I want that life to be with you if you will still have me. Zachary crossed to her and took her hands. I will have you any way I can get you, he said. For as long as you want me. Laura smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Then I guess we have a future to plan. The process was every bit as difficult as Mrs. Henderson had warned. The lawyer, a stern but fair man named Mr. Garrett, made the trip to Bandera to meet with Laura and hear her story. He explained that Texas law did allow for divorce in cases of cruelty and abandonment, but that proving cruelty could be challenging, especially when it was a wife's word against a husband's. However, Mr. Garrett said, adjusting his spectacles, the fact that you have visible scarring and multiple witnesses who can attest to your condition when you arrived here will help. Additionally, if Mr. Marsh cannot locate you to contest the proceedings, we can move forward with a petition of abandonment from his side. He is looking for me, though, Laura pointed out. He came here with the deputy. But he found no evidence that you were here, Mr. Garrett said. As far as anyone can prove, you are simply Zachary's cousin from back east. If we file the papers in San Antonio and move carefully, we may be able to complete the process before Mr. Marsh even knows it is happening. It took 6 months. 6 long months of waiting and worry, of Laura jumping at every unexpected sound, of Zachary sleeping with his rifle close at hand. But they were also 6 months of growing closer, of learning each other's rhythms and habits, of building something real and solid between them. Zachary taught Laura to ride, and she proved a natural horsewoman, taking to it with a joy that made his heart sing to watch. They would ride out together in the evenings, exploring the ranch and the land beyond, and Laura slowly began to relax, to trust that safety was not just a temporary condition, but something she could actually have. Laura, in turn, brought life to his home in ways he had not realized he was missing. She planted a garden, filling the space behind the house with vegetables and herbs. She befriended the other ranch wives in the area, becoming part of the community in a way Zachary, solitary by nature, had never managed. She sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and the sound filled the house with warmth. They did not share a bed during those months, both of them agreeing that despite their feelings, it was important to wait until Laura was truly free. But they shared everything else, their hopes and fears and dreams, their daily lives intertwined in countless small ways. Zachary would catch himself watching her as she worked in the garden or reading by the fire, and he would feel such overwhelming love and gratitude that she had stumbled into his life that it nearly took his breath away. Clayton came back twice more. The first time, he arrived without the deputy, just him and 2 rough-looking men who Zachary suspected were hired guns. They searched the property despite Zachary's protests, looking through the barn and the outbuildings, but Laura had hidden in a space beneath the floorboards of the house that Zachary's father had built as a storm shelter, and they found nothing. Clayton had been angry, threatening, but without proof, there was nothing he could legally do. The second time he came alone, late at night, drunk and belligerent. He pounded on the door, shouting Laura's name, demanding that Zachary return his property. Zachary had met him on the porch with his rifle, and the two men had faced each other in the moonlight. "She is not here," Zachary had said coldly. "And even if she was, she is not property. She is a human being with the right to choose her own life." "You self-righteous fool," Clayton had snarled. "You think you are better than me. You think you can steal a man's wife and face no consequences." "I think a man who beats his wife deserves to lose her," Zachary had replied. "Now get off my land before I put a bullet in you for trespassing." Clayton had left, but not before promising that this was not over, that he would see both Zachary and Laura pay for their disrespect. The threat had hung over them like a storm cloud for weeks after. But then, finally, the letter came. Mr. Garrett wrote to inform them that the divorce had been granted. Clayton had been served with papers and had contested them, but his own behavior in court, his inability to control his temper when questioned by the judge, had worked against him. The judge, an older man who had seen too many women suffer at the hands of cruel husbands, had ruled in Laura's favor. She was free. Zachary found her in the garden when he got back from town with the letter. She was kneeling among the tomato plants, her hands in the dirt, her face tilted up to catch the late afternoon sun. She looked peaceful, content, and he hated to disturb her, but this news could not wait. "Laura," he called, and she turned, smiling at him. Then she saw his face, saw the letter in his hand, and she stood quickly, her hands going to her mouth. "Is it?" she asked, not finishing the question. "You are free," Zachary said, crossing to her and holding out the letter. "The judge granted the divorce. It is done. You are free." Laura took the letter with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the legal language. Then she looked up at him, and there were tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, laughing, radiant with joy. "I am free," she repeated, as if testing the words, tasting them. "I am actually free." Zachary pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes. "Marry me," he said. "Not today, not tomorrow, but when you are ready. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Laura. I want to build a family with you, grow old with you, wake up next to you for the next 50 years. Please say you will marry me." "Yes," Laura said without hesitation. "Yes, Zachary, 1,000 times yes. You saved my life in every way that matters. You showed me what love is supposed to look like, what it means to be cherished and respected. I want nothing more than to be your wife." He kissed her then, their first real kiss, and it was sweet and perfect and full of promise. The sun was setting over the Texas hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and red, and Zachary thought he had never been happier in his entire life. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Bandera. Mrs. Henderson stood up for Laura, and Tom Johnson, Zachary's nearest neighbor and closest friend, stood up for him. The whole community turned out, everyone who had come to know and love Laura in the months she had been living there. If anyone suspected that she was not really Zachary's cousin, that her story was more complicated than they had been told, nobody said anything. The West had a way of respecting a person's past, of understanding that sometimes people needed a fresh start. Laura wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Zachary had picked that morning. She looked beautiful, radiant with happiness, and when she said her vows, her voice was strong and clear, with none of the fear that had marked her speech when she first arrived. Zachary's own voice shook with emotion as he promised to love her, to honor her, to stand by her side through whatever life brought them. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her to the applause and cheers of their friends and neighbors. The reception was held at the Johnson Ranch, with tables set up outside and lanterns hung in the trees. There was music and dancing, and Laura laughed more than Zachary had ever heard her laugh, her joy infectious and bright. He watched her dance with Tom and with old Mr. Patterson from the general store and with half a dozen others, and his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. When they finally made it home late that night, both of them giddy and exhausted, Zachary carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly their home, not just his. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood looking at each other in the lamplight. "I was so afraid for so long," Laura said softly. "Afraid that I would never escape, that Clayton would find me, that even if I got away I would never be able to trust anyone again. But you changed all that. You gave me back my life, Zachary. You gave me back myself." "You did that," Zachary said, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "You were brave enough to run, brave enough to ask for help, brave enough to build a new life. I just gave you a safe place to land." "We saved each other," Laura said, and it was true. Zachary had been alone for so long, married to his ranch and his solitude, not even realizing how lonely he was until Laura brought light and warmth into his world. She had saved him from a half-life, just as surely as he had saved her from Clayton's cruelty. That night, they came together as husband and wife, and it was tender and sweet, and everything a wedding night should be. Zachary was careful with her, knowing that her experiences with Clayton had left scars both visible and invisible, but Laura was not fragile. She was strong, a survivor, and she met him with equal passion and love. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Zachary felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Laura proving to have a keen head for business and numbers. She kept the books and managed their dealings with the cattle buyers, freeing Zachary to focus on the physical work he loved. They expanded the herd and bought more land, slowly building something substantial that could be passed down to future generations. Their first child arrived 2 years after they married, in the spring of 1881. A boy with Zachary's dark hair and Laura's bright eyes, whom they named Nathan after Zachary's father. Laura labored through the night with Mrs. Henderson attending her, and Zachary paced outside the bedroom door, terrified in a way he had never been, even facing down armed rustlers. But when he finally heard the baby's cry and Mrs. Henderson called him in to meet his son, all that fear evaporated in an instant. Laura looked exhausted but triumphant, holding the tiny bundle against her chest. "Come meet your son," she said, smiling up at him through happy tears. Zachary approached slowly, reverently, looking down at the tiny red face and impossibly small fingers. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I love you so much." Nathan was followed by 2 more children over the next years. A daughter, Emma, born in 1883 with Laura's dark hair and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And then another son, Jacob, in 1885. Who was quiet and thoughtful even as a baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. The house filled with noise and laughter and the chaotic energy of children. Zachary built onto the original cabin, adding rooms to accommodate their growing family. He taught Nathan to ride and rope, and watched with pride as his son took to ranch life like he had been born to it. Emma insisted on learning everything her brother learned, refusing to be left behind just because she was a girl, and Zachary and Laura encouraged her independence, both of them believing that their children should be free to choose their own paths. Laura bloomed in motherhood, her last shadows of fear fading as the years passed, and their life together became secure and real. She was an attentive mother but not a coddling one, teaching their children to be strong and self-reliant while also being kind and compassionate. Zachary would sometimes catch her watching the children play with an expression of wonder on her face, as if she still could not quite believe this was her life, that she had escaped darkness and found so much light. They never heard from Clayton again after the divorce. Rumor reached them, years later, that he had died in a bar fight in Careville, drunk and belligerent to the end. Laura had not grieved when she heard the news, but Zachary noticed she seemed lighter after, as if some final tie to her old life had been severed. The community of Bandera embraced them fully as the years passed. Zachary served on the town council and helped organize the annual cattle drive. Laura started a small school, teaching the ranch children their letters and numbers in the front room of their house. They were respected, valued members of the community, known for their hard work, their kindness, and their devotion to each other and their family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Laura back to the barn where he had first found her, where this whole incredible journey had begun. The children were staying overnight with the Johnsons, giving them a rare evening alone. They climbed up to the hayloft as the sun was setting and sat together in the same spot where she had hidden that night, terrified and desperate. "You remember?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I remember everything," Laura said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, that Clayton would find me and kill me. I remember hearing you climb that ladder and being so scared I could barely breathe. And then I remember looking at your face when you told me I was safe, and something inside me that had been broken for so long started to heal. 'Please do not send me back,' Zachary quoted softly. 'That is what you said to me that night.' 'And you never did,' Laura said, turning to look at him. 'You kept me safe, Zachary. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. Everything good I have, everything I am now, started that night when you chose to help a stranger instead of turning her away.' 'I was not being noble,' Zachary said. 'I took one look at you and knew you were going to change my life. I did not know how, did not know it would be like this, but I knew nothing would ever be the same, and I was right. You changed everything, Laura. You took a lonely man living a half-life and gave him purpose, love, a family, everything that matters.' They kissed as the sun set outside, painting the barn in golden light, and Zachary thought about how strange life was, how one decision, one choice to show compassion to a desperate woman, had led to all of this. 10 years of love and laughter, 3 beautiful children, a home filled with warmth and life. He had expected to live and die alone on this ranch, a solitary man content with his cattle and his land. Instead, he had found his other half, his partner in every sense of the word. Laura rested her head on his shoulder as darkness fell around them, and they sat listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "I love our life," she said quietly. "Every single day, I wake up grateful. Grateful that I had the courage to run, grateful that I ended up here, grateful that you were the man you are. I never believed in fate before, but sometimes I think maybe we were always meant to find each other, that all the pain and fear was leading me to this, to you, to this beautiful life we have built together." "I believe that," Zachary said. "I have to believe that, because the alternative is to think about how easily I could have missed you, how I could have been in town that night, or you could have hidden somewhere else. The idea of a life without you is unbearable." They made love there in the hayloft, surrounded by the ghosts of their beginning, and it was even sweeter than their wedding night had been, layered now with years of history and trust and deep, abiding love. Afterwards, wrapped in the blanket Zachary had brought up from the house, they talked about their plans for the future, about the ranch they would build, the legacy they would leave their children. As the years continued to pass, that legacy took shape. Nathan grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Zachary's body began to slow with age. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind, and Zachary knew the ranch would be in good hands when his time came to step back. Emma, true to the independence she had shown even as a small child, went to teachers' college in San Antonio and came back to establish a proper schoolhouse in Bandera, teaching the next generation of Texas children. She had suitors aplenty, but she chose carefully, eventually marrying a lawyer from town who treated her as an equal partner and supported her work. Zachary thought about the night he had found Laura, about how the cycle of cruelty could have continued if she had not had the courage to break it. And he was proud beyond words that his daughter lived in a world where she could choose her own path, marry for love, and be valued for her mind as much as her beauty. Jacob, the quiet one, surprised everyone by developing a talent for horses. He could gentle the wildest mustang, could read an animal's mood and needs like he was reading a book. By the time he was 16, people were bringing him horses from 3 counties away to train. He built a stable on the edge of the ranch property and made a good living doing what he loved, and Zachary and Laura could not have been prouder. Their later years were peaceful ones, filled with grandchildren and the satisfaction of work well done. They had expanded the original cabin into a proper ranch house, with a wide porch where they would sit in the evenings watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. They would hold hands like young sweethearts, and Laura would sometimes laugh and shake her head at how far they had come from that frightening night in the barn. Zachary's hair went silver, and his hands developed the ache of arthritis from years of hard work. Laura's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life spent laughing and smiling. But when they looked at each other, they saw not the changes time had wrought but the people they had always been to each other, the scared young woman and the compassionate cowboy who had taken a chance on love. On their 25th anniversary, the whole town turned out for a celebration. The children, now grown with families of their own, organized a party that lasted from noon until well past midnight. There was food and music and dancing, and story after story about the difference Zachary and Laura had made in the community. They had helped neighbors in hard times, had opened their home to those in need, had shown by example what a marriage built on mutual respect and love could look like. As Zachary danced with his wife under a sky full of stars, the same sky that had hung over them that first night, he thought about how one act of kindness could ripple outward in ways you could never predict. He had given Laura shelter and safety, and she had given him a life beyond his wildest dreams. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone, in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the example they had set for their community. "What are you thinking about?" Laura asked, looking up at him with the same bright eyes that had captured his heart 25 years ago. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Zachary said. "How one decision, one choice to help someone in need led to all of this. How my whole life pivoted on that moment when I heard you breathing in my barn." Laura smiled, that radiant smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "We are both lucky," she said. "Lucky that we found each other, lucky that we had the courage to build this life together, lucky in love." They danced until their feet ached and their grandchildren were falling asleep in their parents' arms. And when they finally made it home in the small hours of the morning, they stood for a moment looking at the barn, silvered by moonlight, exactly as it had been that fateful night in 1878. "Thank you," Laura said softly, "for saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life I never dreamed I could have." "Thank you," Zachary replied, "for trusting me, for choosing me, for making me happier than I ever knew a person could be." They walked into their house hand in hand, partners still after 25 years, best friends and lovers and the center of each other's worlds. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would walk out to the barn and climb up to the hayloft to sit in the place where their story began, well, that was nobody's business but theirs. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that time always brings. Zachary's father, whose legacy had built the foundation of their ranch, would have been proud to see how it had grown under his son's stewardship. But Zachary knew the true strength of what they had built was not in the acres or the cattle, or even the house they had expanded over the years. It was in the family they had created, in the love that had started from such desperate beginnings and grown into something unshakable. As they grew older still, they gradually turned over more responsibility to their children, content to spend their days in each other's company. They took long rides around the property, remembering stories attached to different places, the fence line where Nathan had learned to rope his first calf, the creek where Emma had caught her first fish, the meadow where Jacob had first shown his gift with horses. Laura still tended her garden, though Nathan had hired hands to help with the heavier work now. She would spend hours among her plants, and Zachary would watch her from the porch, still marveling at the miracle of her presence in his life. Sometimes she would catch him watching and laugh, calling him a foolish old man, but he could see the pleasure in her eyes, the joy of being so completely and thoroughly loved. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and a community that had grown with them over the decades. Bandera had changed and grown, but the ranch remained a constant, a testament to what could be built with hard work, love, and determination. That night, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Laura and Zachary sat on their porch swing, rocking gently in the warm Texas night. The stars overhead were the same stars that had shone on them throughout their life together, constant and bright. "You have any regrets?" Laura asked, a question she had never posed before in all their years together. Zachary considered it seriously, as he considered all her questions. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Every choice I made that led me to you, every decision after, I would make the same way again. My only regret is that we will not have another 30 years, another 50. However long we have, it will not be enough." Laura leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture as natural and comfortable as breathing after so many years. "I used to be so afraid," she said, "afraid of everything. Afraid of making noise, afraid of doing something wrong, afraid of the next blow. And then you taught me a different way to live. You taught me that love does not have to hurt, that marriage can be a partnership, that every day does not have to be survived but can be enjoyed. You gave me 3 decades I never thought I would have, filled with more happiness than I knew existed in the world." "We gave that to each other," Zachary said, taking her hand and raising it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I was alone before you, existing but not really living. You brought color to my world, Laura. You brought joy and laughter and purpose beyond just working the land. You made everything better." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the cattle settling, the horses moving in the barn, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived, of peace earned through years of love and partnership. "I hope they know," Laura said quietly. "Our children, our grandchildren. I hope they know how lucky they are to grow up with love, with safety, with parents who cherish them. I hope they never have to learn the hard lessons I learned, never have to run in fear for their lives." "They know," Zachary assured her. "They know because we showed them every single day, because we built a home where love is freely given and respect is paramount. That is our real legacy, Laura, not the ranch or the land or the money we have saved. It is the example we set, the life we live together, showing them what love is supposed to look like. As if summoned by their words, Emma appeared on the porch, carrying a sleepy granddaughter. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly. Little Sarah wanted to say goodnight to Grandma and Grandpa before we headed home. Laura opened her arms and the child climbed into her lap, snuggling against her grandmother's chest. "Good night, little one," Laura murmured, kissing the top of the girl's head. "Sweet dreams." "Tell me the story," Sarah said sleepily. "The story about how you and Grandpa met." It had become a favorite bedtime story for all the grandchildren, though Laura and Zachary had carefully edited it to be appropriate for young ears. They told a romantic version, about a woman who got lost on the prairie and found refuge in a kind cowboy's barn, and how that chance encounter led to a great love story. "A long time ago," Laura began, her voice taking on the storytelling tone she had perfected over years of teaching school and reading to children. "I was traveling through Texas when I got lost. It was dark and I was very tired, and I found a barn where I could rest. But the barn belonged to a cowboy named Zachary, and when he found me, instead of being angry, he asked if I needed help." "And then you fell in love," Sarah announced, having heard the story many times. "Not right away," Zachary said, ruffling the child's hair. "First, I made her breakfast." "You should never try to fall in love on an empty stomach." Sarah giggled, and Laura continued the story, leaving out all the darkness and fear, focusing on the hope and the growing affection, the way two lonely people had found each other and built something beautiful. By the time she finished, Sarah was asleep and Emma carefully lifted her daughter into her arms. "Thank you," Emma said, looking at her parents with an expression of deep love, "for everything you have given us, for showing us what a marriage should be." After Emma left, Zachary and Laura remained on the porch, not quite ready to go inside yet. "We sanitized that story quite a bit," Zachary observed. "They do not need to know all the darkness," Laura said. "They do not need to know how close I came to not making it, how terrified I was, how much pain I was running from. They just need to know that love can save you, that kindness matters, that happy endings are possible even when things seem hopeless." "But you want them to know the truth someday," Zachary said. It was not a question. "Someday," Laura agreed, "when they are old enough to understand, to appreciate how precious what we built really is. I want Emma to know, especially, so that if she ever meets a woman in trouble, she will help without hesitation, the way you helped me." "She would anyway," Zachary said confidently. "We raised her that way." They did eventually tell the full story, years later, when all three children were grown with families of their own. They gathered the family together one Sunday afternoon and laid out the truth, all of it, holding nothing back. They spoke of Clayton's cruelty, of Laura's desperate flight, of the fear that had marked those early months, of the battle to get the divorce, of building a life in the shadow of past trauma. The children listened in stunned silence, and then Nathan spoke. "I always knew there was something," he said slowly. "Some reason why you two looked at each other the way you do, like every moment together is a gift. Now I understand." "I want you to understand that love should never hurt," Laura said fiercely, looking at each of her children and their spouses in turn. "I want you to know that if you are ever in a situation where you are afraid, where you are being hurt, there is always a way out. There are always people who will help. Your father showed me that, and I hope you will show it to others." "We will," Emma promised. "We will remember, and we will teach our children, and they will teach theirs. Your story will not be forgotten." True to their word, the story became part of the family legacy, passed down through generations. But it was not told as a tragedy. It was told as a story of hope, of courage, of the power of compassion and love to transform lives and create something beautiful from something broken. Zachary and Laura lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary, a celebration that brought family from across Texas and beyond. They were in their 70s by then, their bodies worn by decades of hard work, but their love as strong as ever. The party lasted 3 days, with cousins and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren running across the ranch that had been built on the foundation of that fateful night in 1878. On the actual anniversary night, Zachary and Laura slipped away from the festivities and walked slowly to the barn. It was harder to climb the ladder now, their joints stiff and protesting, but they managed it, determined to mark this milestone in the place where it all began. 50 years, Laura said, settling into the hay with a small groan. 50 years since the best night of my life. You said it was the worst night of your life, Zachary reminded her, easing down beside her. It was both, Laura said. The worst because of what I was running from, the best because of what I was running to, even though I did not know it yet. Every good thing in my life started that night, Zachary. You, our children, this ranch, this community, all of it traces back to the moment you climbed this ladder, and instead of sending me away, you offered me food and shelter and eventually love. Zachary put his arm around her, and she leaned against him the way she had thousands of times over the decades. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, he said. Even scared and dirty and hurt, there was something about you that called to me. I would have done anything for you from that first moment, and that never changed. I would still do anything for you. I know, Laura said softly. You have proven it every day for 50 years. You loved me when I was broken, when I was healing, when I was strong. You loved me through 3 pregnancies and 3 births, through sick children and hard winters and drought years, and every other challenge life threw at us. You loved me without reservation, without condition, and you taught me to love that way too. They sat in the hayloft as the celebration continued in the house, music and laughter drifting across the yard. From where they sat, they could see lanterns hung in the trees, could see their family dancing and celebrating, could see the life they had built spread out before them like a tapestry woven from love and determination and grace. No regrets? Zachary asked, echoing her question from years before. Not a single one, Laura said. Even the pain, even the fear, even Clayton and everything he did, I would not change it because it led me here to you, to this. I would walk through fire again if I knew this was waiting on the other side. They climbed down eventually and rejoined their family, dancing together slowly as their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren looked on with love and admiration. The story of how they met, the real story with all its darkness and light, had become legendary in the family. A reminder that love could conquer even the deepest pain, that kindness mattered, that one choice to help someone in need could change not just one life but generations. As the years wound down, as Zachary's steps grew slower, and Laura's memory began to fade gently at the edges, they remained devoted to each other. Nathan ran the ranch now, had run it for years, but the elder couple still lived in the main house, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like young lovers. Zachary passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Laura holding his hand. She mourned deeply, the loss of her partner of more than 50 years leaving a hole that nothing could fill. But she did not break. He had taught her to be strong, had shown her that she was capable of surviving anything, and she drew on that strength now. She lived another 3 years without him, surrounded by family, cared for with the same devotion and love that she and Zachary had always shown to others. On quiet evenings, the family would find her in the hayloft, sitting in the spot where her story with Zachary had begun, talking to him as if he was still there. "I will see you soon," she would say, her voice soft but certain. "Wait for me, my love, we have more adventures ahead." Laura passed on a spring morning in 1933, with the sun streaming through the windows and her children gathered around her bed. Her last words were of Zachary, calling his name with a smile on her face, and those who were there said she looked young again in that moment, looked like the girl who had hidden in a barn 55 years earlier and found not just shelter but salvation. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree that Zachary had planted the year Nathan was born. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and the words that summed up their life together. Love found, love given, love eternal. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, and every Xavier who inherited it also inherited the story of how it all began. The barn remained standing, maintained carefully by each successive generation, with the hayloft preserved exactly as it had been that night in 1878. It became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a reminder of where they came from, of the courage and compassion that founded their legacy. Emma's great-granddaughter, herself named Laura in honor of the matriarch, wrote a book about the story years later, changing the names but keeping the essence true. It became a local bestseller in Texas, a tale of the Old West that was equal parts romance and redemption. And it ensured that the message Zachary and Laura had lived their entire lives teaching would reach even beyond their own family. The story resonated because it was true in all the ways that mattered. It was about finding love in unexpected places, about the courage to run from abuse, about the compassion to help a stranger, about building something beautiful from broken pieces. It was about second chances and new beginnings, and the power of choosing kindness over indifference. Years turned into decades, and the world changed in ways Zachary and Laura could never have imagined when they sat together in that hayloft. But the ranch remained, and the story remained, passed down with love and care to each new generation. The barn became a historical landmark, preserved by the state of Texas as an example of pioneer architecture. But the family made sure visitors knew it was more than just old wood and hay. It was the birthplace of a love story that had touched hundreds of lives across more than a century. Every year, on the anniversary of that September night in 1878, the Xavier family gathered at the ranch for a celebration they called Founders' Day. They would tell the story again, making sure the youngest members knew where they came from, what their ancestors had survived and overcome and built together. They would climb up to the hayloft, as many as could fit, and someone would recite the words Laura had spoken that first night. "Please do not send me back." And someone else would respond with Zachary's promise. "You are safe here." It became a family motto, those words. "You are safe here." They lived by it, building their lives and raising their children to embody that promise. If someone needed help, a Xavier helped. If someone was running from danger, a Xavier offered shelter. They honored Zachary and Laura's legacy not just by remembering their story, but by living their values, by being the kind of people who would climb a ladder to check on a stranger's breathing, who would offer food and shelter, and eventually love to someone in desperate need. The land itself seemed to remember them. The oak tree on the hill grew tall and strong, providing shade for countless family picnics and gatherings. The garden Laura had planted expanded over the years, maintained lovingly by her descendants, always full of the same vegetables and herbs she had grown. The house that had started as a simple cabin and been expanded into a proper ranch house was updated and modernized over the decades. But the original rooms were preserved. The bedroom where Zachary and Laura had slept for 50 years kept as it had been, a museum to their love. And the barn, of course, remained the heart of it all. Modern barns were built for the working aspects of the ranch, but the original barn was maintained in pristine condition, a monument to that night when everything changed. The ladder Zachary had climbed was reinforced, but never replaced. The hayloft where Laura had hidden was kept supplied with fresh hay. Even the rifle mounted near the entrance where Zachary had reached for his weapon remained, though no rifle hung there now, just a small plaque telling the story. Visitors came from all over, drawn by the book and by the romance of the story. The family welcomed them graciously, Zachary and Laura's descendants having inherited their gift for hospitality. They would give tours, tell the story, and inevitably there would be tears, because it was impossible to hear about what Laura endured and what Zachary offered and not be moved. More importantly, the story saved lives. Over the years, more than one woman fleeing abuse found her way to the Xavier Ranch, drawn by the story, hoping for the same mercy Laura had found. And the family, true to their legacy, never turned anyone away. They offered shelter, protection, resources to start over. They worked with modern domestic violence organizations, funding shelters and legal aid for women escaping dangerous situations. Laura's story became a rallying cry, proof that escape was possible, that there were good people in the world willing to help. The legacy Zachary and Laura built together extended far beyond their own family. It became a part of Texas history, a part of the story of the Old West that acknowledged not just the heroism of gunfights and cattle drives, but the quieter heroism of compassion and love. It reminded people that the Old West was not just about survival of the strongest, but about communities that looked out for each other, about individuals who chose mercy over indifference. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Zachary and Laura Xavier rested together, their hands still clasped, their love still burning bright. They had found each other in the darkness and built a light that would shine for generations, a beacon of hope that said no matter how bad things are, there is always a chance for something better, always someone willing to help, always the possibility of love. Their story had begun with 5 simple words spoken in fear and desperation. "Please do not send me back." It had been answered with a promise kept faithfully for more than 50 years. "I never did." And in those words, in that exchange between a frightened woman and a compassionate man on a September night in 1878, lay the foundation of everything that came after. Every life touched, every person helped, every generation that carried forward the message that love, real love, is about protection and respect and building something beautiful together. The Xavier Ranch still stands in Bandera, Texas, a working ranch run by the 6th generation of Zachary and Laura's descendants. The barn still stands, carefully maintained, its hayloft a sacred space where couples come to exchange vows, where family members come to remember, where anyone seeking hope can climb a ladder and imagine a frightened young woman hiding in the hay and a cowboy who climbed up to check on a strange sound and changed the course of multiple lives with a simple act of kindness. The story lives on because it matters. In a world that can be harsh and cruel, it reminds us that there are still good people, still safe places, still the possibility of love finding us even in our darkest moments. It tells us that our choices matter, that a single decision to help someone in need can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine, touching lives for generations. And on quiet evenings, when the Texas sun sets in brilliant shades of gold and red across the hills around Bandera, if you stand near that old barn and listen carefully, Some say you can still hear echoes of the past, the sound of a ladder creaking, a frightened voice saying, "Please do not send me back," a kind voice responding, "You are safe here." And then laughter, warm and full of life, the sound of two people who found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever, both in life and in memory, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love.